I'd like to encourage you to find one of these black Bibles around you. It might be behind you in a chair and a chair in front of you. Take it out. If you don't have a Bible, this is yours to keep. If you know someone who could use a Bible, take it and give it to them. And we're going to be in Genesis chapter 46. If you're looking for the page number, sometimes that's easier. It's page number 38. And I just want to encourage you to open to that. We're going through a series in Genesis, and we've titled this back part of Genesis as we get to the end, God meant it for good. And we're going to really see that coming here in the next couple weeks of why the whole series was titled that. But to give kind of a summary, what's been happening and to catch up to speed is Genesis, sometimes we just think of creation and we think of Noah and the ark and all of those things. But that's just a small part of it, and we did that months ago. But we've been then following Abraham and then Isaac and then now Jacob. And today we're going to see the end of Jacob's life, kind of the conclusion of it. And as we do that, last week we looked at how Jacob was faced with the need for change, where he was in Canaan and things weren't great because there was a famine going on, but this is the land that God had promised him to be. And he had to wrestle with leaving Canaan. And so we saw how the chariots really helped him see, like, oh, there's wagons, there's things for me to come in. And so we saw how God works through change to help encourage us through that. And now he's on the journey back to, or on the journey to Egypt to see his son that he thought was dead. Joseph was his favorite son, the one with the colorful robe. And he thought, he died because his brothers had sold him as a slave, and then they dipped it in blood, and we're like, look what we found. And he's like, oh, he must have been eaten by wild animals. And so his whole life is being changed. And we're going to kind of see what happens as reunited with Joseph. And there's so many things we can look at the text today, but there's something that stood out to me over and over and over again, and it was the position that the Israelites, which is Jacob's family, his clan, the position that they took as they entered Egypt. It wasn't a position of might, but it was a position of humility. It makes me think back to when we're all in high school. I think we've all been to high school, right? You go to high school, and at the very end, they have you do all these awards. Who's most likely to be president, and who's most likely to be famous. I'm sure today, the teenagers can correct me, it's probably who's going to be the greatest influencer. So you have all these things, and it's all about the status that you're going to have one day. I can tell you no one in my graduating class is president, and I don't even know what I was voted for. It was none of those cool things. Anyways, as you look at that, our world as we continue our life, as we continue into adulthood, constantly tells us to position ourselves so that we have a good image, we have power, we have position. And we try to make that something that's core to who we are. I find this in my own life, if I'm being honest. There's so many times I have to pump myself up to try to make myself seem more important than I really am. Because let's be honest, when people hear you're a pastor in today's society, they don't even know what that is. They're like, so what do you really do? And then I have to try to justify what I do, right? Anyways. So we find ourselves sometimes stuck in this weird thing of positioning ourselves. But what we see in today's text is that actually God's people, Jacob and his family, don't position themselves with power like chest out, look at what we are, but they come at a humble position. And so I thought of that humble position, and as I was thinking of what that looked like, I was thinking about how many times a car breaks down on 14 Mile Road. Bear with me. They hit a pothole, they hit something, and they blow a tire, and there's this big parking lot right here that they pull into. And they pull in, and they come on just their rim. And so as they're there, they'll go into their trunk, and they'll have to take out the spare tire, then they'll have to take out all the junk in their trunk, all that kind of stuff. And then they find this little tiny jack, and you see them trying to jack up their car with this thing that I don't even know how it was legally allowed to be a jack. And you just see they're struggling, right? So I am no mechanic. I am not great at cars, any of that. But I love when this happens because I get to go back to our garage and act like I'm a mechanic. And I pull out this big old jack that we have, and I wheel it across the parking lot, and we jack up that car. But this is why I'm sharing this story, is because the jack is critically important to the car getting fixed. Without the jack, you can't change the tire. And if you were to get an oil change, any of that, you know you have to lift up the car. But yet the jack is never the hood ornament. They don't even make hood ornaments anymore, but if you know what I'm talking about, that little thing that was on front of the car, I used it in driver's training so that I could line up the line. Anyways, that thing. It's not the hood ornament. It's not the decoration. It's not anything that is great. It just takes a humble, low position below the car. But what does it do? It lifts it up. Our faith journey is constantly one of being challenged to take a humble, low position, because that's how God wants us to lift things up. In fact, the big idea is humility takes the low place and trusts God to do the lifting. You don't have to lift yourself up. God will do it. You just have to trust that he's actually going to do it. And in order to trust him to do it means you have to be humble enough to say, God will do it, and I don't have to do it in my own strength. This is something that was taught in Genesis, we're going to see, and thousands of years later with Jesus. Jesus had this moment, and we find it in Mark, where his disciples, James and John, are arguing. And they're arguing over who's going to be who's going to sit at his left and who's going to sit at his right in glory in heaven. Do you recall this moment? And they say, when you sit in your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. They're like, Jesus, look, we've done all this to serve you. We gave up our lives for you. We followed you. We went and we fed the people. We've been along this journey. So at least give us a place of honor. And what is Jesus' response to them? He says, but among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader must be a servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be a slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and give his life as a ransom for many. This is a text that Jesus taught. This is a teaching of Jesus, not of you are called to be higher, but you're called to be what? Lower. And what I love about the teachings of Jesus is they're the teachings of God all throughout the Bible. It's not like suddenly Jesus comes along and he teaches some profound thing. We find the same lesson is being taught here in our text in Genesis. The first thing we're going to see from our text is this: we're called to actually take a low place. Let's start digging in as we read. There's this whole genealogy kind of a story of who came throughout Genesis 46, and then we're going to pick up in Genesis 46, verse 26. It says, the total number of Jacob's descendants who went with him to Egypt, not counting his sons' wives, was 66. In addition to Joseph had 2 sons who were born in Egypt, so altogether there were how many members? 70 members. This is a lot of people moving, not counting some people that it said we excluded them. And they moved to Egypt. As they neared their destination, Jacob sent Judah. I want you to mark that, highlight that, underline that. Sent Judah ahead to meet Joseph and get directions to the region of Goshen. So there was this plan to get them to this land of Goshen. And in order to get there, they had to first go be reunited with their brother Joseph. So as they're going to meet Joseph, they have to send a spokesperson. They have to send somebody to go ahead of them and meet him. Who do they send? Judah. Well, who is Judah? Judah is the one who actually came up with the marvelous plan to not kill Joseph, but to sell him as a slave. Do you remember that? And what did he say when he did it? He said, what would we gain if we kill him? We might as well sell him. So I want you to think about this for a second. Judah was previously in a position where it was all about what he could get out of a situation. What could he gain from his brother? If I kill him, I get nothing. If I sell him, we get something. But yet Judah's heart begins to change. And we saw that heart change begin to take place over the last several weeks. And what took place is he began to go from the one who said, let's sell Joseph, to when it was time for Benjamin to go down, he says what? I guarantee my life for it. And when then Joseph says, no, I'm going to keep Ben as a slave here, what does Judah say? No, take me instead. So Judah has this heart change. And what is important about the heart change is I believe there's times where God takes us from a place where we look at what we gain, and we have to come to a place of realizing it's not really about what I gain, but what I can do to serve. And Judah's heart has changed. So then, who is the one sent to go see Joseph? It's not Reuben, the oldest, is it? It's Judah. Of all the brothers, there's 11 that could have been chosen. He chose Judah. And I believe this is significant because he was chosen to be a leader. He was chosen to speak on their behalf, but it wasn't because of a title, was it? It was because of what was shown in his life, I believe, as he saw the transformation take place. See, having influence does not automatically make someone a good leader. You've all had those leaders around you that they have influence, and they don't use that influence necessarily for good. Some of you are like, preach it. I got a boss at work, if you only knew. So some of us have experienced that, and so you could have influence, you could have power. Sadly, I say this, being a pastor, I always encourage other pastors to check yourself over and over and over again, because God put you in a place where you could influence others, and you could do it poorly. You really could. And some people have experienced that, and I'm the first to say I'm not the perfect pastor, so let me tell you that. But there are times where people are put in a place of influence, but just because they have a title or a position doesn't mean they're actually influencing well. You should see fruit out of their lives. There should be something that you see of a change or a way that they actually lead. Judah isn't put in this position just because of a title. He's put in this position because I believe what has changed in his life. And so that's why I wanted to pause with Judah, because it's kind of intriguing to me that that's who was chosen. So they finally arrived there. We're back in verse 29. And Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to Goshen to meet his father. I mean, can you just imagine being Jacob for a second? Your son who was gone, you thought was dead. Now he's alive, and he's approaching you in a chariot. Talk about a 180-degree change, right? What God can do, taking someone who was in a well and put him in a palace. He was in a palace, and he was in a prison cell. He was in a prison cell, and now he's riding on one of Pharaoh's chariots to go meet his father, Jacob. I mean, God is so full of redemption. It's amazing and incredible. So here he comes, and he's in the chariot, and he goes to meet his father, Jacob. And when Joseph arrived, he embraced his father and wept, holding him for a long time. I could imagine that reunion took a long time. We don't know what a long time means, but it was a while. And they were probably sobbing and crying like little babies, and they were just holding each other. And I can't imagine what Jacob was going through, because his whole life, for all these years, he had thought his son was dead. And here he's embracing him and holding him and hugging him. I truly believe so often in our own faith journey, there's seasons where we feel like Jacob, and all has been gone, and all has been lost. But God gives us those Josephs in our lives where we get to hug on, and we get to say, wow, look. And some of us have been the Joseph, and we get to have that hug of Jacob and that reuniting that happens only with God. So you have this. And Joseph said to his brothers and his father's entire family, I will go to Pharaoh and tell him, my brothers and my father's entire family have come to me from the land of Canaan. I'm going to pause there for a second, because I wanted to spend a lot of time originally just looking at the way they reunited and what happens, and we could do that. But something kept coming up over and over again as I was looking and studying through this text. He says, I'm going to go to Pharaoh. I'm going to tell my brothers and the entire family have come. And what's he going to say to Pharaoh? These men are what? Shepherds. And let's just reiterate what a shepherd is. They raise livestock. And so he says, I'm going to go, and I'm going to talk to Pharaoh. And I'm going to say, you guys are shepherds. You raise livestock, and you've brought flocks and herds and everything. you own. Now, if you've been around church for any sort of time, or if you're like me, I've always seen shepherds as good. I mean, we call Jesus the Good Shepherd. We have a nativity scene where you have to have the shepherd and the sheep. If you don't have the shepherd and the sheep, it's just not the right nativity scene, right? Like, we paint shepherds around, we paint sheep, especially in our little kids' wings. Our new kids' wing won't have sheep on it. But anyways, we paint it there, and we're like, oh, we put all these cute things around shepherds, and we make shepherds good. Have you ever noticed that? But shepherds in our text aren't seen as good. He's not saying, I'm going to brag about you. I'm going to share about how awesome you are. I'm going to share about the highest position you have in society. No, he says, I'm going to tell that you're shepherds. Look at what happens. Then he said, when Pharaoh calls for you and asks you about your occupation, you must tell him, we servants have raised livestock all our lives, as ancestors have always done. When you tell him this, he will let you live here in the region of Goshen. For what? The Egyptians, come on, despise. They despise shepherds. Now, Goshen is this land that Joseph wants them to be able to live in, and so he knows, like, this is going to be a good strategy to get them separated from the rest of the Egyptians. So there's something that Joseph's doing there. He knows the land, right? He's been traveling the land. He's gotten all the grain. He knows this, and he wants his family to be in the best position. So he comes up with this plan. No lies, no deceit. This is all truth, right? And he knows that the Egyptians despise shepherds. The word despise, though, isn't even a powerful enough word. Because if you actually were to study it in the original language, it's an abhorrence. It's not just a despise, it's an abhorrence of shepherds. That means an extreme disgust, a loathing, a detestation. Just, I can't stand shepherds. Why would the Egyptians hate shepherds so much? I mean, come on, all they do is hang out with sheep in the fields. Like, it sounds like a good profession, right? We were just at the Detroit Zoo recently, minus the 696 that took us all the way 5 miles past the zoo to get back to the zoo to only sit in more construction, which I always wonder, like, if you have to take a road to get somewhere else, why do you put that road under construction too? Anyways, we're at the zoo, and there's this whole new exhibit they've put, like where the old barn area used to be and stuff. If you haven't been to the zoo, it's pretty awesome, especially for kids. Like, it's all this interactive stuff. It's really cool. My oldest could care less, but my youngest liked it. And so we were there, and all of a sudden we're petting the goats. They have a new exhibit where you can pet goats. And so we're petting the goats. I'm like, I want to own goats one day. Like, it just sounded cool. And my family's like, you can't even keep up with the lawn, let alone goats. But, like, why would you despise goat keepers? Come on, like, it sounds like an awesome thing. They despised them for several reasons. The one was, years prior to Joseph, there was a group of shepherds that moved up from the south, and they actually took over mid-Egypt to southern Egypt, and they enslaved the Egyptians. And so they had a really bad taste in their mouth from shepherds who had come before. The second reason that they probably despised them is the Egyptians had all these sorts of gods. And you could study that even in hieroglyphics, or if you look at, like, the pyramids, you could see history of their gods that they had. They had one god named Amun-Ra. Amun-Ra was their supreme god, their sun god. If you look at the head of Amun-Ra, it's actually a ram's head. And so for a shepherd to control their supreme god was something they didn't believe in. The other thing is that they thought they were a sophisticated society. They were like your Silicon Valley of the day, right? Like, we know all the answers. We're building the data centers, baby. Some of you got it, some of you didn't. Anyways, they were the sophisticated ones, and as they were thinking that, the shepherds were just those farmers out in the field that knew nothing, right, compared to them. And so there could have been several reasons why they despised them. Those are 3 of them that it could have been. But yet, here's what I find amazing. Joseph doesn't tell them to lie about their status, does he? He doesn't try to say, pomp yourself up and make yourself seem supreme, does he? He actually says, embrace it. Embrace being a shepherd. It picks up in chapter 47, Joseph went to see Pharaoh and told him, "My father and my brothers have arrived from the land of Canaan. They have come with their flocks and herds and possessions, and they are now in the region of Goshen." So Joseph took 5 of his brothers with him and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh asked the brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they replied, "We, your servants, are" what? Shepherds. They obeyed what Joseph said. And not only are we shepherds, but they said, just like our ancestors. In other words, they doubled down on embracing it. They're like, we're shepherds. My grandpa was a shepherd. My great-grandpa was a shepherd. My great-great-grandpa was a shepherd. We're nothing but shepherds. That's basically what they embrace. And so then, we have come to live here in Egypt for a while, for there is no pasture for our flocks in Canaan. The famine is very severe there, so please, we request permission to live in the region of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Now that your father and brothers have joined you here, choose any place in the entire land of Egypt for them to live. Give them the best land of Egypt. Let them live in the region of Goshen." I'm going to pause there for a second because Pharaoh is staying true to his word. He told Joseph, "Bring your brothers, your family, your father back here, and I will give them anything you want." And so he's staying true to his word. But then look, "And if any of them have special skills, put them in charge of," this is something underline, circle, mark, "my livestock too." We're going to come back to this in a few moments because there's an important element that takes place because he says, "I want you to be in charge of my livestock too." I love that they embrace who they are. They trust what their brother said, and they take a step of a low position rather than high position. See, when we're truly being humble, we don't have to manipulate appearances to gain approval. We don't. We can just embrace where we're at, where God has us, and who He's called us to be. They accept the low social position, and they trust God with the outcome. And that leads to what happens next. Our humble position does not put lifting ourselves up in our hands, does it? It only puts it in God's hands. And we have to get to a place where if we're truly walking humbly, we're trusting God with the lift. Look at verse 7. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Now, I'm just for clarity, because we're going through it, I wrestled through this because I've heard so many things about him blessing Pharaoh and what it could mean for him to bless Pharaoh, and why would Jacob be in a position to bless Pharaoh. But honestly, as I studied it, the word just means greeted. It's like he said hi to him. It wasn't like a special blessing that was put on him. At least that's what I, from my studies, came to. It just was him saying, "What's up?" Like, "Hey, Pharaoh." So he comes in, and he says hi to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh asks the brothers, or not, so then he says hi to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh says to him, get this, "You're meeting Pharaoh, the king, like the leader of Egypt." I'm expecting a profound question here. And he asks, "How old are you?" Like, of all the questions, there could have been more, it's just what's recorded, is Pharaoh asking, "How old are you?" But there's an importance to the answer here, because the answer shows Jacob's humility, his honesty, yet God's provision through it all. Jacob replied, "I have traveled or sojourned this earth for 130 easy years." Does he say easy? No, he says 130 what? Hard years. He embraces the truth that life has not been easy for him. Think about it. He wanted to marry Rachel, and he was told what? You got to work 7 years. He worked 7 years, and all of a sudden, he wakes up with the wrong wife. So then he works 7 more years to get Rachel. Like, his life was not easy. Then he has a son, with Rachel, and the son is Joseph. And Joseph is the one who he thought was dead for all these years. And then he has to hold on to Ben to the point of being, oh, nope, you got to give up Ben. Then he's sitting in the promised land, which is Canaan, which he thought was the place for him and his ancestors and all this history. And then what happens? They're like, yeah, I got to leave Canaan and go to Egypt. Like, his life was never easy, was it? And he says, I've journeyed for 130 years, and it's been hard. Now, that 130 years, he goes on to say, but my life has been short compared to the lives of my ancestors. So we know, and we'll see at the end, that he lived for 147 years. Now, some of us can't even fathom that, but he lived for 147 years. Abraham lived for 175, and his father Isaac lived for 180. So his 147 years is actually much shorter than his dad and grandpa. And so he's saying, look, it hasn't been as long as my ancestors. But then, to an Egyptian, for them, a complete life, a full life, a whole life is 110 years. So what he's saying is, look, because of my God, because of who I follow, because of who I believe, I've been blessed with many more years than you Egyptians consider whole. And my ancestors have had many, many more years than even I have that you consider whole. So he's like, look, like we've been blessed, but it hasn't been easy. It's been hard. And he embraces that truth as well. And so he answers the question. And then it says, Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before leaving his court. So where does it go next? This is where the story, in my opinion, really picks up. So you have this moment with Pharaoh and Jacob, and you have the brothers, and they're saying they're shepherds, and they embrace their lowly position, and now they're in Goshen. So understand what's happening. There's a famine. It's not only in Egypt, it's in all the neighboring lands. And this famine is what actually caused Joseph to interpret dreams, and then he stored the warehouses up for 7 years, and then he gave out the crops, and this famine is ravishing their land. And because of God's provision and the way that he revealed things, Joseph's been in this position where they're able to save the storehouses, and in the storehouses he's been giving out provisions, including to his own family, without them knowing. And so as he's been doing this, his family now, through all of this, has settled in Goshen. And it says that Joseph provided food for his father, his brothers, in the amounts appropriate to the number of their dependents, including the smallest children. But then, verse 13. Meanwhile, the famine became so severe that all the food was used up, and people were starving throughout the lands of Egypt and Canaan. Now it's getting real. It's not like there's just a famine. This is a real famine. People are starting to actually lose stuff. By selling grain to the people, Joseph eventually collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan, and he put the money in Pharaoh's treasury. So what happened because of the famine? All the people had to give up all their money, and then Pharaoh collected it all, right? People are broke, Pharaoh is rich. Okay. When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, all the Egyptians came to Joseph. Our money is gone, they cried. Please give us food, or we will die before our very eyes. So Joseph replied, since your money is gone, bring me your what? Livestock. Who's in charge of the livestock? His family. Because Pharaoh had given the authority to Joseph's family to care for the livestock, and so now the Egyptians, who had this elitist status, who had all this power in the world, who thought they were so great and civilized, are now having to sell what? Their livestock. And who is it going to? Pharaoh. But who's in charge of Pharaoh's livestock? Joseph's family. I will give you food in exchange for your livestock. So they brought their livestock to Joseph in exchange for food, in exchange for their horses, flocks of sheep, goats, herds of cattle, donkeys. Joseph provided them with food for another year. But that year ended. In the next year they came again and said, we cannot hide the truth from you, my lord. Our money is gone, and all our livestock and cattle are yours. We have nothing left to give but our bodies and our land. We have nothing left. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We offer our land and ourselves as slaves for Pharaoh. Just give us grain so we may live and not die, and so the land does not become empty and desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold him their fields because the famine was so severe, and soon all the land belonged to Pharaoh. As for the people, he made them all slaves from one end of Egypt to the other. The only land he did not buy was the land belonging to the priests. This is why you should all go into ministry. They received an allotment of food directly from Pharaoh, so they didn't need to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Look, today I have bought you and your land for your Pharaoh. I will provide you with seed so you can plant the fields. Then when you harvest it, 1/5 of your crop will belong to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seed for your fields and food for you, your households, and your little ones." When we hear slavery, I think we have preconceived notions in our mind of what that is, especially the horrific events of the modern day slavery, right? Like that's what our mind goes to. But when they were slaves, they were actually more slaves to the fact that they had to owe something to Pharaoh. They owed 1/5 of everything to Pharaoh. The 9 a.m., I don't know if I should repeat it again. Just look at your taxes and how much you owe, and I'll leave it there. You know how you say you're a slave to Uncle Sam anyways. So they have to give 1/5, and then 4/5 they get to keep. "And you have saved our lives," they exclaimed. "May it please you, my lord, and let us Pharaoh's servants." Joseph then issued a decree still in effect in the land of Egypt that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown in his land. Only the land belonging to the priests was not given to Pharaoh. All right, you catch what happened to the Egyptians. They went from great status to what? Nothing. Like, here we are, take our land, take us, take everything. Verse 27, "Meanwhile, the people of Israel," who are the people of Israel? Jacob's family, "settled in the region of Goshen in Egypt. And there they what? Acquired." They didn't lose, they gained. Well, Egyptians were losing everything. God's people were gaining. They acquired property, and they were fruitful, and their population grew rapidly. Jacob lived for 17 years after his arrival in Egypt, so he lived 147 years in all. Here's the takeaway from it. Trust God with the lift. Because they entered in a humble position, and they said, "You know what? We're just shepherds." But by being shepherds, what happened? They were actually put in charge of all the livestock, and they grew. Only God could write that story. See, they couldn't sit there and say, "Well, we're shepherds, we're going to gain." Like, humility doesn't know that what God's going to bless in the future. It just walks humbly with him and says, "Lord, wherever I'm at, use me." And then God used them as shepherds, and they gained. But what I love is that's not where our text ends. Because I think that's where a lot of times we end in our faith journey. I was nothing, but God made me something. I had nothing, but yet God redeemed me. I had all this, but yet God... But that's not where Jacob's story ends. He actually doesn't sit there and boast in the abundance anymore. He keeps his eyes focused on the promise. See, that's the third thing. In our faith journey, it's not just about taking the low position and trusting God for the lift. It's always keeping our eyes on the promise. Because what happens next shows that. As the time of his death drew near, Jacob called for his sons Joseph and said to him, "Please do me this favor. Put your hand under my thigh and swear that you will treat me with unfailing love by honoring my last request." Can you imagine Joseph and his brothers hearing his last request? "Come on, Dad. What's it going to be? You want ice cream? Like, what do you want?" He says, "Do not bury me where? In Egypt." Was Egypt the promised land? Was Egypt the land that God had said his people would be fruitful and multiply in? No. Egypt was just a moment that God used. It wasn't the promise that God had. "When I die, please take my body out of Egypt and bury me with my ancestors." I find this to be one of the most revealing things of Jacob's heart. because Egypt may have been where God provided for him, but Egypt was not what God had promised for him. And he understood the difference between provision and promise. He understood that while he was provided for, and yes, Egypt was a means of that provision, his identity wasn't focused in the provision. It was focused in the provider, in the one who had the ultimate promise for him, and that was God himself. His family was safe. His children had food. His grandchildren had a future, and life had become comfortable. And yet he still says, "Don't leave me here." Church, if I'm being honest, sometimes we stop at the provision and we feel really comfortable. And we just say, all right, I'm good. My job's good. My home's good. My position's good. My relationship's good. My season of stability is good. But then our job becomes our identity. Our title becomes our identity. Our income level becomes our identity. And what other people think of us become our identity, and not the one who actually has been with us all along the way, and that's Jesus. And that should be our identity. He's the promise, not our position, our place, our things. And if I'm being honest, no one lived this out more fully than Jesus Christ himself. Think about it. He left the glories and riches of heaven to come to earth. He took the form of a servant. He washed feet before he died. He touched the forgotten, the lame, the beggar, the leper, the one that no one would touch. He went there and he was there for them. He welcomed to the table the sinner and the tax collector. He went to the lowest of lows and took the humblest of positions. He welcomed the rejected and he carried a cross. And if I'm being honest, Jesus went lower than you and I ever could go. But the cross was not the end of the story, was it? It was God who raised him from the dead and made his name greater than any other name, that every knee shall bow and tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And Jesus didn't have to climb over people to get there. He didn't have to protect an image. He didn't have to fight for recognition. He didn't have to pretend that everything was together. He knew he was loved by his Father. He knew God had a great plan for him, and he knew the outcome was greater than any situation. So where are you trying to lift yourself? Where are you trying to force something and saying, I got to do this, this, or this to get there? Trust God with the lift. Get low. Be like a car jack. It's not sexy. It's not awesome. It's just kind of nasty, greasy, and under the car. But trust God with what he can do when you're there. And let him do the lifting. Let him be the provider. And when he's the provider, catch this, don't keep your eyes on the provision, but focus on the promise. Because the minute our eyes get off Christ, we've lost it all. And so keep your focus on that. Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the fact that you are a God who meets us right where we're at, who uses us right where we're at, who takes us, and even when we're in the most humble of positions, Lord, then uses that to lift us up so that we can point others to you. Lord, for those of us who are struggling with what is our purpose, what is our plan, help encourage us to just embrace where you have us. What are you calling us to do? Who are you calling us to meet with? Who are you calling us to be there for? Where are you calling us to be a car jack that's underneath that greasy, grimy car? And Lord, as we see you lift us up in our lives, because I know you will, Lord, help us to keep our eyes on you, the one who is the perfecter of our faith. May we never lose sight of your promises for us.